The following broadcast is a presentation of Mount Zion Media Ministry.
I shall begin reading at verse 10 and read all the way through verse 24. The priests who were carrying the ark stood in the middle of the river until all of the Lord's commands that Moses had given to Joshua were carried out. Meanwhile, the people hurried across the riverbed, and when everyone was safely on the other side, the priests crossed over with the ark of the Lord as the people watched. The armed warriors from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh led the Israelites across the Jordan, just as Moses had directed. These armed men, about 40,000 strong, were ready for battle, and the Lord was with them as they crossed over the plains of Jericho. That day the Lord made Joshua a great leader in the eyes of the Israelites, and for the rest of his life they revered him as much as they revered Moses. The Lord had said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the ark of the covenant to come up out of the riverbed." So Joshua gave the command. As soon as the priests carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant came up out of the riverbed, and their feet were on high ground, the water of the Jordan returned and overflowed its banks as before. The people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Then they camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho. It was there at Gilgal that Joshua piled up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, "In the future, your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you can tell them, 'This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea, when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever." Amen. You may be seated. I want to preach today about a legacy of overcoming faith. A legacy of overcoming faith. Amen. And I hate to use this language because I don't believe we ought to do it, but for the sake of the message, let me just use it. As we close Black History Month, African American History Month, and part that I don't like to use is closing the month, because Black history is something that we ought to be engaged in 12 months, 365. But as we close, I want to draw our focus in on African American history and say to you, in spite of what you might know or some may try to teach you, there are more than a few African Americans worthy of celebration. And I say that because if you notice, it's the same few that we talk about all the time, and if you go in certain places, you will see the same pictures repeated over and over. There's Martin Luther King, there's Sojourner Truth, there's Harriet Tubman, and and a couple of others, Rosa Parks, there you go, and a few others, and they act as if that's all we got. But I want to say to you, when you talk about the contributions of people of African descent, not just to the history in America, but to world history, that you would find comparison in the 7th chapter of Revelation, where John stood as he was talking about his vision of heaven and said he looked and saw a number that no man could number, coming up out of every nation. And that's us. You cannot number the people of African descent who have contributed to the history and the betterment of this world. And you can't relegate them to any particular nation, because in every nation, we have been major contributors. And let me just give you this definition of legacy so we'll all be on the same page. Legacy is something transmitted by or received from an ancestor or predecessor or from the past. And so out of that number that can't be numbered of contributors to world history who are of African descent, there is much to be transmitted. And the legacy that we share is what they have transmitted to us. Not only have they transmitted it, but they transmitted us something that will work. Because legacy is about life and living. It's about learning from the past, living in the present, and building on the future. And so we have to know the past to navigate the present. And we surely can't go into the future without some kind of stabilizing history, some kind of sustaining and encouraging history. And I'm saying to you that we have that in the study of our history. And it disturbs me that we even have to have this conversation. Because if the world was just, our history would be incorporated truthfully with all of the history, and we wouldn't have to carve out this time to study our own. But because the world is not fair, we have to make sure that we tell our own story. And this story that I just read to you out of Joshua is a story that we can use as a template, as a model, taken from God's relationship with the Jewish people, of how we can make sure that we pass on the legacy from one generation to the next as it relates to the African community. And today, I could not talk about all of American history, the world history as it relates to African Americans, so I've taken out one portion, and that is that portion of legacy out of our history that deals with overcoming by faith. We who are people of color have a strong legacy of overcoming. And I'm going to show you in just a little while why that is critical for this day and time. And so here we go, so that we can get to the heart of this message. Wake up and write this down. First thing this lesson teaches us is that we who are people of color and non-color ought to resolve to help each generation understand the importance of legacy. We've got to resolve to do what we need to do to help each generation understand the importance of legacy. Think about it for a minute. How many times have you seen among the generations of your people persons who have no appreciation for those who came before them or the work that they've done. How many times have you seen new leaders vilify the old leader? How many times have you seen friction between generations when a new group comes on the scene? Rather than working with the current folk who are working, the older generation, the generation ahead of them, or even behind them, they want to say that you all are not relevant, only we are. We have romanticized it now. But SNCC and SCLC, led by Martin Luther King, didn't get along. The reason we have SCLC is because NAACP couldn't really embrace King. There wasn't all that harmony and kumbaya. Right now in America, we have the National Baptist Convention, which is the oldest black Baptist convention, but there is another one called the Progressive Baptist Convention. And do you know why they were started? Because they were, at the time that King and the movement started, they were led by an older generation under the leadership of the Reverend J.H. Jackson out of Chicago, Illinois. And people like Gardner Taylor and Moss, and that generation said that those young folk were crazy and had no business protesting for equal rights. And the King generation and the Taylors and the Mosses and the Booths said, but we can do this together. And what happened is a split. Because the generations couldn't see the importance of being together. And somehow, we got to resolve to break this cycle, because even in this most recent time, the Black Lives Matters and the others had no real need, no real connection to other established groups. There were all kind of groups out there, splinters trying to do their own thing for the most part. In some places it was different, but that's the most part. It's like we can't come together. I got to tell you, and I was disturbed too as I watched the Black Church on PBS, that second segment, when there were people on there saying that the church had no relevance to this new generation. How dare you? That's your root, baby. Let me read something to you here. Why, as it relates to the importance of legacy. And this comes out of an article that a young lady wrote that talks about the importance of legacy. Listen, whether you think it's best to plant a young tree, a clearing in an old growth forest, or an open field, ecologists tell us that a young tree grows better when it's planted in an old area with older trees. The reason, it seems, is that the roots of the young tree, listen, are able to follow the pathways created by the former trees and implant themselves more deeply. Over time, the roots of many trees may actually graft themselves to one another, creating an intricate, interdependent foundation hidden under the ground. In this way, stronger trees share resources with weaker ones so that the whole forest becomes healthier. That's legacy. An interconnection across time with a need for those who have come before us and a responsibility to those who will come after us. When you read that text, what you see in there is that interconnectedness. Joshua did, and the people did what Moses had instructed them to do. And at the time of their crossing of this river, Moses is dead. And yet, the connection between he and Joshua is his legacy. Moses was drafted by God to lead the people in the promised land. He couldn't take them all the way in. And so Joshua steps up and takes the place of Moses to lead them in, but there is that connectedness. He does not disconnect himself of the people from Moses and the previous generation. And Joshua did all that Moses told him to do, and the people did all that Moses told them to do. Listen, why was that so critical? Because, listen, the mission didn't change, but the method did. The mission is to get the people to the promised land. When God brought the children of Israel out, as the text says, God dried up the ground so they could cross the Red Sea. Now they got a river to cross, and they need some help, but check it out. The method that God used with Moses to get across was a different method that he used for Joshua in that generation. Moses, why y'all standing there crying? Because you got the Red Sea before you and Pharaoh's army behind you. What you got in your hand? A rod? Then raise it up. And as he raised it up, God caused the water to fall back all night long, and then they were able to walk across the next morning on dry ground. Joshua, it's time to cross the Red Sea now. But you don't have the same rod Moses had, and I'm not going to do it the same way. This is what I want you to do. Let the priests who've been designated to carry the ark walk in the middle of the Jordan River, and it's at flood stage when they go over. And he said, look, now you listen. It's going to be flooding, and there's going to be no change until the feet of the priest strike Jordan. Don't sit there and wait on it to roll back. Don't sit there raising your hand. That's not going to happen. But when your feet strike Jordan, and then have the priest with the ark to go stand in the middle, and I'm going to roll the water back. And then let the people walk across on dry ground, and when they get across, get me one man from each tribe to come back and get a stone, because I got something I want you to do when you get over there. Different method, but same mission. Different method, same mission, same God. And I wish these generations could understand the mission is the same. Liberation of our people, the uplift of our people. The methods may change, but God is the same. God the same. And the legacy that we have to share is the one that God is the same. And so, why we always got to be against each other? Why we always got to be like the crab in the barrel? Why just because you the new kid on the block, now all of a sudden ain't nobody did anything before you? No, that I know that's correct, but that don't sound right. So let me just use incorrect English. Ain't nobody did nothing before you. Everything had nobody been preaching unto you. Ain't nobody giving a word but you. Don't nobody know how to lead people but you. Don't nobody. What? Every generation is connected to another. And you notice that analogy of the tree, and as I move on, how there were paths that had already been created. And the roots of those young trees just went through those paths. See how easy that was? But see, the reason some young folk catching hell, you trying to create a path where there is not one. You catching hell because rather than following paths that have already been set, trying to work your way through hard dirt, just beating yourself upside the head. And then you want your root to be all by itself. You better connect with some other folk. And not just anybody. But you better find you some old trees. You know, y'all better hear me, young folk, find you some old trees. I'm 66 and I got me an old tree that I'm connected to. I got some young trees and old trees, and the weak help the strong and the strong help the weak. So So we got to resolve to help every generation understand the importance of legacy. And then the next thing we got to do is resolve that the family and the church are responsible for teaching our history to our children. Please wake up and write that down. The family and the church are responsible for teaching our children their history. This is what we as a people have done for the most part. It's a shame. Schools don't teach our history. Yeah, we don't. I mean, once a year for February, the shortest month in the year. Why they gave us the shortest month in the year? And our children don't know our history. Everybody know our history but us because the schools don't teach it. It's not the school's responsibility to teach your children your history. And here's the other thing that you have to understand and be prepared to deal with. If your child goes to public school, there are limitations put on them by somebody outside of your school district as to what your child is taught. I saw my good friend, our member, and the gracious superintendent of the Daughter County School System, Brother Ken Dyer, come in, and I pray for him, and I thank him for the wonderful job that he's doing. But he don't get to just pick the textbooks. His curriculum director can't just pick textbooks and the teachers. There is some oversight up in Atlanta. And that oversight has a particular worldview, and they want you to be taught a particular way. And so any books that does not align itself with that, you just can't use them. And then if they go to private school, you know. And what they are taught is distorted. I read one history book that said slaves enjoyed slavery because the masters in the South were so compassionate. And when slavery ended, they didn't want to leave slavery. They were upset. They won't just stay in slavery all their lives. I am not making this up. That was in the history book. And so, and so you have to take responsibility. And again, you take a page out of this history. You read Deuteronomy chapter 6, and God tells the children of Israel, teach your children while you're walking, while you're in the house, sitting down, laying down, right? Teach them. And then in this text that we read, here is the lesson. I told you to get 12 stones and then build me a memorial. Why do I want you to build this memorial? Because in future generations, your children will come this way. What mean? Why is this memorial here? What does it mean? And that's your opportunity to teach them their history. And in the Jewish faith, it's taught at home, it's taught in the synagogue, and we've got to teach it in our churches and in our home. And listen, you don't even have to go get the stones. They're already around you. You've got the stones that have been built, you know, those memorials and monuments. You, in your town, every town got some official monuments, memorial, use those. But there are some unofficial ones that's not on the record. If you, for example, from Albany, you can ride down, I think that's South Madison, and there is the old Madison High School, old Monroe. That's a memorial to tell your children. Now you sitting over there in these fine state-of-the-art schools and tell us you can't learn, but right there, in that school right there with limited resources, we learned. And we had teachers who taught us and we learned. And you can tell these families and these parents who claim they can't help your children, we learned, and we had parents who couldn't read, who couldn't write, who couldn't help us with homework either. But here's what they had: a hunger for us to have better. Now you take my brother over there. Now he's educated. He's highly educated. You can tell the way he talks, can't you? I mean, he's educated. He's Morris Brown graduate. He has a doctorate degree. All that, honor student, Glee Club, you name it, he did it. His daddy only went to the 6th grade. His mama went to the 11th grade. But his parents wanted him to have more than they had. And so while they couldn't help him, they pushed him to get it and got him the help that he needed to get educated. I missed it, but he got it. And so what it does is remove the excuses. Because everybody, we know they ain't got no help at all. Yes, they do. I don't care if she can't read. I don't care whatever the excuse is. If you are hungry enough for your children to have it, you'll find a way. And so we got to start teaching them. And let me just say one word, though, a caution. When it comes to church, be careful what church you're in. And I'm not talking about a particular race of church because this happens in any of them, because some people have been whitewashed. Because if you're going to be accurate in the teaching about history, you have to begin in the Bible. And there are some people who don't believe that Africans have a presence in the Bible. And there are some people who don't believe that, that there's anything that Africans have contributed, people of African descent have contributed that's worthy of celebrating. And those folk are even in the church. And so when they teach you about your history in the church, it's history that tears you down and not build you up. So be careful. Be careful. Listen, Carter G. Woodson said, as another has well said, to handicap a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse and that his struggle to change his condition is hopeless is the worst sort of lynching. Let me read that again. To handicap a student by teaching him that his black face is a curse and that his struggle his struggle to change is a condition that is hopeless is worse than lynching. Why do I read that? Because in Christianity, there are churches that teach you that God cursed black folk. That Cain was cursed with blackness and then Noah's son, and they believe that. And that the curse will never be removed. It's helpless. And this is what they believe, that until God comes back, black people were designed to be subservient to every other race. Listen at me now. And that when you get to heaven, it's going to be another heaven for you. Even in heaven, you won't be in the same heaven. So we got to teach it. And here's what I close with right here. You and I have got to resolve that we pass on.
Thanks for watching. Be blessed and continue walking in the light.